state and local aid seems to be one of the biggest points of disagreement here. You wrote, again, a great dish, I think, yesterday, talking about this. Democrats are pushing for the $1 trillion aid package. That number may not be based on actual state budget shortfalls. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found here?
So I have been curious as well about the $1 trillion asks. Is this excessive? Is it what they really need? I mean, where did $1 trillion come from? So I thought, okay, well, it's time to do a little work. So roll up the sleeves and do just a simple little Excel exercise that compares what would have happened with what is actually happening and sort of measuring the gap. So to get a notion for what would have happened, I simply took the growth rate of state and local aggregate receipts from the beginning of 2017, so roughly the Trump presidency, through the first quarter of this year, and said, okay, let's assume that the future would have been you continue on that trend. And so that's the world we never got to see because the pandemic hit, and we got a huge recession. Now we're going to have to get a recovery. Well, what will be the actual receipts in that recession recovery? To get that, I assume that the aggregate receipts were the same share of GDP as they were in the first quarter of 2017. But as we know, GDP fell dramatically and is now sort of expected to rise again. For that, I used the CBO projection for the economy. And so now I have two lines: one, receipts that would have happened without the pandemic; two, receipts that happened with the pandemic. What's the difference between them? Well, over 2020 and 2021, it's $380 billion. And so that's a serious number. I mean, that's not zero. A reminder, the CARES package provided states and localities with $150 billion. So if you take this number at face value, and that's probably too much faith, but take it at face value, there's a $230 billion unmet need over the next 2 calendar years. And so that to me says, okay, now I have some idea of sort of the ballpark that we ought to be in. And it's not a ballpark that contains $1 trillion in my view, but it's also not a ballpark that contains zero additional dollars. It contains a couple $100 billion. And so I'm looking for evidence that the negotiations are moving towards something like that. And, if it turns out it's 400 instead of 300, well then, fine. The science here is pretty thin. Just trying to get an idea of roughly what's out there.